The Battle of Gettysburg, fought between July 1st and July 3rd, 1863, was not merely a tactical collision of two massive armies, but an event of concentrated human trauma that transformed a small Pennsylvania crossroads into a site of enduring mystery. With over 51,000 casualties resulting from 3 days of brutal combat, the physical landscape was saturated with the emotional and physical residue of the dying and the dead. Historical records and paranormal accounts suggest that the sheer scale of suffering, men dying far from home, bodies left in the sun for days, and hospitals overflowing with the mangled, created a psychological and spiritual imprint on the land that persists today. These stories examine the specific sites, apparitions, that define Gettysburg as America's most haunted battlefield. Devil's Den is a landscape of massive, prehistoric boulders that saw some of the most intense close-quarters fighting of the second day. The area is historically noted for its pre-war reputation as a home to large snakes and local superstitions, but its identity was forever changed on July 2nd, 1863, when Confederate forces under General James Longstreet captured the position after a fierce struggle against Union General Daniel Sickles' forces. The most famous recurring apparition at Devil's Den is the helpful hippie. Since the 1970s and 80s, visitors have reported being approached by a man with long, unkempt hair, bare feet, and ragged clothing, often wearing a floppy felt hat. This figure typically appears when tourists are lost or confused by the rocky terrain. He points toward the round tops and says, "What you're looking for is over there," before vanishing. While early modern visitors mistook him for a hippie because of his appearance, park rangers later identified his description as a perfect match for a member of the 1st Texas Regiment, the Ragged Old First, whose uniforms were famously disintegrated by the time they reached Pennsylvania. In one specific account, a woman wearing a University of Texas sweatshirt was approached by the man, who exclaimed "First Texas" before disappearing. Devil's Den is notorious for camera and electronic malfunctions. Visitors report fully charged batteries draining in seconds and digital screens going black, only for the devices to function perfectly once they leave the area. This phenomenon is frequently linked to a specific historical event involving the photographer Alexander Gardner. After the battle, Gardner and his assistants moved the body of a dead Confederate soldier approximately 40 yards to a more dramatic position in a sharpshooter's nest to create an iconic image. Paranormal investigators, including former park ranger Mark Nesbitt, think that the spirit of this soldier harbors a lingering animosity toward photographers for the desecration of his remains, leading to modern-day interference with recording equipment. Little Round Top provided a strategic overlook that Union forces under Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain successfully defended during the critical second day of the battle. The victory of the 20th Maine is central to the history of the site, but the paranormal reports here often center on individual soldiers who seem unaware that the conflict has ended. A compelling account from the 1993 filming of the movie Gettysburg involves a group of extras portraying Union soldiers. While resting on Little Round Top at sunset, the men were approached by a rather haggard old man in a filthy Union uniform that smelled strongly of sulfur, a byproduct of 19th century gunpowder. The man remarked, "Rough one today, eh, boys?" and handed them a handful of musket rounds before walking into the woods and vanishing. The extras initially assumed he was a fellow actor with high-quality props, but upon inspection by the film's prop master and later by historical experts, the rounds were identified as genuine, pristine Civil War-era ammunition, not the modern blanks used for the film. Auditory hauntings are common on the hill, particularly the sound of drumming. This is associated with the legend of Gideon, a young drummer boy killed in the fray. Visitors report hearing a steady beat coming from the brush where no living drummer is present. Additionally, sightings of Colonel Chamberlain himself are frequently reported, appearing as a figure surveying the field from the ridgeline, seemingly still overseeing the defense of the position. Gettysburg College, founded in 1832, was occupied by both armies during the conflict, and its oldest building, Pennsylvania Hall, served as a massive field hospital. The surgical procedures of the era, primarily amputations performed without anesthesia, left a gruesome legacy that is said to manifest as a time slip within the building's elevator. One of the most widely analyzed stories in Gettysburg lore occurred in the 1980s. Two college administrators were working late on the 4th floor and took the elevator to the 1st floor to leave for the night. Instead of stopping at the lobby, the elevator bypassed the floor and descended to the basement. When the doors opened, the administrators did not see the storage basement they expected. Instead, they were met with a scene from a Civil War hospital. Blood-covered walls, dozens of moaning soldiers on the floor, and harried surgeons working with bone saws. A ghostly orderly reportedly looked up from the carnage and approached the elevator with a pleading expression. Terrified, the administrators frantically pressed the buttons until the doors closed and the elevator returned to the upper floors. A security guard sent to investigate the basement moments later found it completely empty and silent, with only the modern storage equipment in place. The Daniel Lady Farm, located east of the town, was the headquarters for the Confederate assault on Culp's Hill. During the fighting, the house and barn were converted into a Confederate field hospital, a role that left permanent physical and spectral marks on the property. In 2010, forensic analysts confirmed that dark stains in the farmhouse parlor and impressions of bloody fingerprints on the walls were indeed human blood from the 1863 conflict. This physical evidence of trauma is mirrored by the farm's most frequent ghost sighting, the soldier in the blue bedroom. When the Lady family returned to their home after the battle, they found a dead Confederate soldier in an upstairs room who had been left behind by retreating forces. His spirit is said to remain in that room, with visitors reporting the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of the bed or witnessing a full-bodied apparition of a young man in grey uniform. The haunting of Gettysburg extends into the very sensory memory of the town. During the weeks after the battle, the town was a landscape of decay. To combat the overwhelming smell of death, the women of Gettysburg walked the streets with handkerchiefs soaked in peppermint and vanilla pressed to their faces. Today, people walking down Baltimore Street report sudden, intense bursts of the smell of peppermint or vanilla where no modern source exists. At the Jenny Wade house, the scent of freshly baked bread is a common occurrence, a sensory echo of Jenny's final task before she was killed. On East Cavalry Field, visitors have reported the scent of cinnamon, a connection to General George Custer, who was known to use cinnamon-scented hair pomade. A unique aspect of Gettysburg's paranormal reputation is the stone curse. The Park Service regularly receives packages of rocks and artifacts returned by tourists who believe that taking these objects from the battlefield brought them years of misfortune. Letters accompanying these stones often detail personal tragedies, lost jobs, health crises, and the dissolution of families, which the authors attribute to the cursed nature of the hallowed ground. The enduring nature of these sightings, from the helpful soldier at Devil's Den to the Phantom Hospital ward at Gettysburg College, suggests that the Battle of Gettysburg did not truly end in July 1863, but continues to echo through the town and the fields that surround it. The echoes of the battle serve as a warning and a legacy, ensuring that the sacrifice made on this ground remains unburied and unforgettable. The history of the Vietnam War, or the American War as it is recognized within the borders of Vietnam, is often presented through the lenses of political strategy, military hardware, and casualty counts. However, beneath the layer of documented combat lies a secondary, spectral narrative that is deeply woven into the cultural and psychological fabric of the conflict. This parallel history consists of ghost sightings, cryptid encounters, and supernatural phenomena reported by participants on all sides of the struggle. For the Vietnamese, these events are not mere folklore, but are viewed as vital presences in their living environment, a consequence of the millions of tragic deaths that occurred between 1960 and 1975. Understanding the hauntings of the Vietnam War requires a foundational grasp of the Vietnamese concept of the wandering soul, Linh Hồn Lang Thang. In this cultural framework, death is not final, but a transition to another realm where the deceased remain part of a shared reality with the living. A good death involves passing away at an old age, surrounded by family, followed by a proper burial in one's homeland. A bad death, violent and sudden, and far from home, is believed to trap the soul in a state of perpetual wandering and suffering. The United States military was not oblivious to these deep-seated cultural fears. In 1970, the U.S. Army's 6th Battalion, in cooperation with the U.S. Navy, launched a top-secret psychological warfare campaign known as Operation Wandering Soul. The objective was to exploit the Vietnamese belief that a soul not buried in its homeland is cursed to walk the earth in torment. By broadcasting the perceived voices of the dead, American planners hoped to demoralize the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army troops, encouraging desertion or revealing enemy positions. The centerpiece of this campaign was Ghost Tape Number 10, a 4-minute audio recording produced in a Saigon sound studio. This recording was a crafted collage of eerie sounds designed to mimic the presence of a vengeful or suffering spirit. It featured Buddhist funeral music, mournful wailing, and the voices of South Vietnamese soldiers who were brought in to record scripts for authenticity. The tape included a voice portraying a dead communist soldier, pleading with his living comrades, saying, "My friends, I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead," followed by cries of, "It's hell. I'm in hell." To heighten the emotional impact, recordings of a young girl crying, "Come home, Daddy," were included with the sounds of gongs and women sobbing. Beyond the orchestrated phantoms of psychological warfare, thousands of American and Vietnamese soldiers reported encounters with actual physical entities that defied standard biological classification. These creatures, known as rock apes or Nguoi Rung, forest people, became a persistent part of the war's lore. Reported primarily in the dense, triple canopy jungles of the Central Highlands and along the borders of Laos and Cambodia, these sightings often occurred during long-range reconnaissance patrols or at isolated firebases. Rock apes were generally described as primates standing between 5 and 6 feet tall, though some reports claimed they reached heights of 8 feet. They were characterized by a muscular, stocky build, broad shoulders, and hair that ranged from reddish-brown to dark grey or black. Witnesses frequently noted that these creatures appeared strikingly human-like, with protruding stomachs and long, muscular limbs. Their behavior was notably territorial and aggressive. They earned their nickname from their tendency to hurl rocks at military patrols that entered their domain. Some veterans recounted instances where soldiers, mistaking the movement of rock apes for enemy infiltrators, would initiate firefights only to find no human casualties. In one extreme case from 1968 at Dong Den near Da Nang, a unit of Marines reportedly engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a group of furry attackers after small arms fire failed to stop them. The phenomenon was not exclusive to American forces. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops reported so many sightings of the people of the forest that the North Vietnamese government ordered scientific investigations into the matter. Dr. Vo Quy, a respected ornithologist from Hanoi, discovered and cast footprints in the forest floor that were wider than those of a human and too large for any known ape species in the region. In 1974, an expedition led by General Hoang Minh Tha attempted to capture a specimen, but the creatures remained elusive, retreating deeper into the undeveloped wilderness. Skeptics often attribute these sightings to the misidentification of native animals, exacerbated by the extreme psychological stress, sleep deprivation, and widespread drug use among GIs. However, the consistency of the descriptions, specifically the upright gait and the lack of fear toward humans, remains a point of contention for those who experienced the encounters firsthand. The tunnel networks of the Viet Cong, such as those at Cu Chi and Vinh Moc, provided a different kind of spooky encounter. For the tunnel rats, soldiers tasked with entering these dark, booby-trapped passages, the environment was a psychological pressure cooker. Beyond the very real threats of malaria, parasites, and enemy ambushes, some reported encounters that crossed into the surreal. One Reddit account from a terminally ill veteran described an encounter in a deep, seemingly ancient tunnel system. After descending stone stairs that did not appear to be of Viet Cong construction, the soldiers found a room containing 10 Vietnamese people, dressed as VC, who were rocking back and forth with blank faces and solid-coloured eyes. They were unresponsive to flashlights or weapons waved in their faces. At the head of the room stood a golden icon of a naked woman with 8 tentacles for legs. The soldiers, overcome by a sense of dread, chose to blow the entrance with C4 rather than investigate further. In the bustling capital of South Vietnam, the hauntings were often tied to the structures built to accommodate the American presence. The apartment building at 727 Tran Hung Dao was notorious for its supernatural activity. Built with 13 floors, a number considered unlucky in many cultures, the construction was reportedly plagued by fatal accidents. According to local legend, a shaman was hired to fix the building's feng shui issues by burying the bodies of 4 virgins at its corners to protect against evil spirits. Despite this ritual intervention, the building remained a site of reported phenomena. Residents and soldiers stationed there claimed to hear the sounds of a military parade marching through the building in the middle of the night. Others reported seeing the apparition of a spectral American GI walking hand in hand with his Vietnamese girlfriend. These urban ghost stories reflect the cultural anxieties surrounding the rapid development of Saigon and the traumatic intersection of American and Vietnamese lives in the city's residential blocks. The ghost stories of the Vietnam War serve as a powerful medium for historical reflection. They provide a space where the trauma of the American War can be processed outside the rigid confines of state-sanctioned history. For the veterans who served, these sightings represent the psychological weight of an unconventional war in an unfamiliar terrain. For the Vietnamese, the ghosts are a reminder of a generation lost to violence and the ongoing moral responsibility of the living to provide the dead with a home. The Korean War, spanning from 1950 to 1953, remains one of the most concentrated periods of human suffering and trauma in the 20th century. While history books meticulously document the movements of the 1st Marine Division or the political schemes at Panmunjom, there exists a parallel history, a second reality whispered in the barracks and around the watchfires of the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. This spectral history is populated by figures in outdated uniforms, phantom radio calls from abandoned outposts, and unidentified aerial phenomena that defied the primitive radar of the era. To the modern observer, these accounts might seem like mere superstition. However, to the folklorist and the military psychologist, they represent a profound cultural mechanism for processing the collective trauma of a war that never technically ended. The haunting of the Korean Peninsula is not a post-war development, but is deeply rooted in the traditional spiritual geography of Korea. For centuries, Korean shamanism, Buddhism, and Confucianism have shaped a world where the living and the dead exist in a state of delicate equilibrium. The sudden, industrial-scale slaughter of the 1950s shattered this balance, creating a landscape of restless spirits who, according to tradition, remain bound to the earth by unresolved grievances or the failure of their families to perform proper ancestral rites. These stories analyze the specific supernatural encounters associated with the Korean War. To understand why the Korean War produced such a specific variety of spooky stories, one must first explore the native concept of the Gwisin. In the Korean worldview, a ghost is not an abstract entity of evil, but a human spirit unable to move on due to an unjust death or deep-seated resentment. These spirits linger in the places where they died, often repeating their final moments or seeking to draw the living into their world. Perhaps no single site of the Korean War is more synonymous with haunting than Hill 303, located near Waegwon. This elongated oval hill, rising 303 meters above the Nakdong River, was a strategic observation post during the Battle of Pusan Perimeter in August 1950. It was here that 41 American prisoners of war were executed by North Korean troops on August 17th. The soldiers, belonging to the 5th Cavalry Regiment, had been captured after believing they were being reinforced by South Korean troops, only to find themselves surrounded by the North Korean People's Army. The survivors, including Roy Manring and James M. Rudd, recounted how the prisoners were led to a ravine and gunned down with submachine guns because the retreating KPA feared they would slow their movement. This event created a massive spiritual scar on the landscape, For decades, soldiers stationed at the nearby Camp Carroll have reported a sense of overwhelming dread when climbing the hill. The Hill 303 massacre has transitioned from a historical event into a military urban legend. Modern accounts describe phantom footsteps following soldiers during physical training runs up the hill and the sound of whispers in the ravine. However, for those who research the history, the hill stops feeling haunted and starts feeling held by memory. This shift in perception, from fear to a ritualistic form of remembrance, illustrates how ghost stories help current soldiers process the history of their predecessors. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir from November to December 1950 is legendary for its brutality. The 1st Marine Division and elements of the 7th Infantry Division were surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers in the high mountains of North Korea. The survival of these chosen few is a narrative of extreme endurance, but it is also the source of some of the war's most ethereal accounts. Veterans often speak of the Hills of Hell, where the white-clad Chinese soldiers seem to emerge from the snow like ghosts themselves. The use of white winter camouflage by the Chinese People's Volunteer Army created a psychological effect where the enemy was perceived as a supernatural force, swarming over ridges in the moonlight. This imagery has fueled legends of white-clad figures that continue to haunt the northern mountains. The trauma of Chosin is also deeply internal. Veterans have reported nightmares that only surfaced 50 years after the war, where they find themselves refighting the battle every night. This phenomenon suggests that the haunting is not just external, but a form of post-traumatic stress, where the past refuses to remain buried. The area around the reservoir is now viewed in modern military forums as haunted in a way that serves as a spiritual defense, a place so filled with suffering that it is permanently scarred. As the war reached a stalemate in 1951, the fighting moved to a series of heavily fortified ridges in the Iron Triangle, including Porkchop Hill and Old Baldy. The conditions on these hills were characterized by relentless artillery bombardment and desperate hand-to-hand combat. On Porkchop Hill, the human cost of holding a militarily insignificant position was enormous. In July 1953, the volume of fire reached 115,000 rounds of artillery in a 5-day period. The physical devastation of the hill was so total that veterans described it as a shambles, where bunkers were repeatedly caved in by 120mm mortar shells. This landscape of dust and blood became the setting for stories of phantom soldiers who refused to leave their posts. Soldiers on night watch frequently report seeing the silhouette of a guard who vanishes into vapor when approached, a motif known along the DMZ as the fog ghost. These spirits are often seen wearing outdated Republic of Korea uniforms, patrolling ammo bunkers that have long since been emptied. The Korean War took place during the first great UFO flap of the 20th century, and the skies over the peninsula were filled with reports of objects that defied conventional explanation. Between 1951 and 1953, as many as 42 corroborated reports of UAPs were recorded, an average of more than one per month. On January 29, 1952, crews from 2 different B-29 bombers reported seeing an orange globe-shaped light. The rear gunner of one bomber described the object as a globe or disc that emitted blue flames like those of a cooking stove. The object shadowed the bomber for 5 minutes, despite the plane traveling at 200 miles per hour. This incident was taken seriously by Air Force Director of Intelligence Major General Charles P. Cabell, leading to the creation of Project Blue Book. The most detailed and disturbing UAP report comes from PFC Francis P. Wall, who was stationed in the Iron Triangle near Chorwan in May 1951. Wall and his regiment observed a jack-o'-lantern-like object wafting down a mountain toward their position. As the object approached, Wall received permission to fire armor-piercing bullets at it with his MI rifle. He recalled the bullets hitting the craft with a metallic ding. The craft responded by pulsating with a brilliant blue-green light and emitting a ray that swept the soldiers in waves. Wall described a burning, tingling sensation throughout his body. 3 days later, the entire company was evacuated, They were found to have extremely high white blood cell counts and symptoms of dysentery, which UFO researcher Richard F. Haynes suggested were effects of radiation exposure. Wall suffered from stomach problems and weight loss for the rest of his life, a physical legacy of a spooky encounter in the hills of North Korea. The persistence of these ghost stories and spooky encounters is not a failure of modernization, but a consequence of it. The Forgotten War was a period of intense trauma that was never fully resolved. The lack of a peace treaty, the continued division of the peninsula, and the mandatory military service for all South Korean men ensure that the history of 1950 to 1953 remains a living part of the present.